Mr. Speaker, in July of 2003, the United Nations Observer Mission on Bougainville certified that the first two stages of the weapons disposal plan were completed. It also stressed, however, that not all weapons were surrendered or collected. Mr. Speaker, by May 2005, the United Nations Observer Mission on Bougainville said that the weapons disposal plan had been concluded, effectively tying the end of the plan, but not necessarily disposing of all weapons, many of which were believed to be stashed away in hidden locations. Mr. Speaker, a United Nations evaluation report from 2012 revealed 4 sources of weapons on Bougainville. A. Weapons used in the Bougainville War, Civil War. B. The World War II remnants. C. Weapons held by Bougainvilleans under PNG Firearms Act. D. Weapons held by Bougainvilleans who are other than the former combatants. Yes, the former ministers of Bougainville Affairs, Sir Pukatemu and late William Sam, Honorable Timothy Masiu, member for South Bougainville, and late Honorable Sam Makoetai, member for Central Bougainville then, as well as former PNG Defense Force commanders Major General Jerry Singarok and Commodore Peter Ilau, and the current president of the Autonomous Bougainville government, Honorable Ismail Torauma, and other Bougainville leaders attended that national reconciliation in Kokopo. Pillar 3 referendum. Mr. Speaker, the Bougainville Peace Agreement clearly stipulates that Bougainvilleans must be given an opportunity to indicate their preferred political future through a referendum. No earlier than 10 years, and in any case, no later than 15 years after the election of the first autonomous Bougainville government. That is in clause 311 of the Bougainville Peace Agreement. The referendum ballot would provide independence as one of the choices. The constitutionally guaranteed referendum was held in November of 2019, and 97.7% of participants voted in favor of the independence option, and 2 agreed choices being higher autonomy or independence. Mr. Speaker, although the people of Bougainville have voted overwhelmingly for independence, both the Bougainville Peace Agreement and the National Constitution requires that the National Parliament must make a decision on the referendum result. Mr. Speaker, consultation on referendum result. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to inform the National Parliament, the national government under the leadership of Prime Minister Honorable James Marape has had a series of post-referendum consultations and dialogues with the leadership of the Autonomous Bougainville government in 2021. The first consultation was held in Kokopo, East New Britain Province. The second consultation was held in Wabek in the Enga Province. And the third consultation was held at the APEC House in Port Moresby, National Capital District. Mr. Speaker, in the first consultation in Kokopo, the Kokopo joint statement was issued calling for technical officials to define the term ratification and also identify a constitutional pathway to bring the results of the referendum to the Parliament for a decision. Mr. Speaker, in the second consultation in Wabek, the parties signed off on the Wabek roadmap to guide the post-referendum process, specifically the need for the results of the referendum and the report of the consultations to be brought to the Parliament for a decision by the Parliament, and subject to that decision of the Parliament, the consequential sequence of events that needed to follow. Mr. Speaker, the third consultation was held at the APEC House on the 9th of December 2021, where an agreement was reached for the Error-Corner Covenant to be signed to prescribe a pathway for the results of the referendum and the report of the consultation to be brought to Parliament for the Parliament to exercise its final decision-making authority in relation to the Bougainville referendum results. The Error-Corner Covenant or agreement was signed by our Prime Minister and our President Torama at Holiday Inn on the 5th of April 2002. Mr. Speaker, the Error-Corner Covenant or agreement essentially calls for a joint report of the consultation to be formulated for presentation to the Parliament for its decision, and the constitutional regulations to be enacted to prescribe the process for the results of a referendum and the report of the constitution of the consultations to be brought to the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it is my unfortunate duty to inform the Honourable House that officials on both sides have not been able to agree on a role of the National Parliament in this process due to differing interpretations accorded to particularly Clause 311 of the Bougainville Peace Agreement and Section 342 of the National Constitution. Mr. Acting Speaker, the divergence of views stems from the fact that Clause 311 of the Bougainville Peace Agreement says that the result of the referendum is subject to, I quote, ratification, final decision-making authority of the National Parliament. And Section 342 of the National Constitution provides for the Parliament to make, I quote, any decision on the results of the referendum. For the benefit of the House, extracts of Clause 311 of the Bougainville Peace Agreement and Section 342 of the National Constitution are attached at the back. You can make a reference to the back of the statement. Mr. Speaker, the technical officials from the autonomous Bougainville government say that Parliament should just endorse or approve the Bougainville referendum result. However, the state's official's position is consistent with the advice from the state solicitor and the Attorney General's Department is that Parliament is open to make any decision by voting on it. Mr. Speaker, after my ministerial intervention, both sides have agreed to allow the National Parliament to determine and adopt its own procedure by way of a sessional order for tabling and deciding on the referendum result. This process will be further explained below. Mr. Speaker, nationwide awareness and consultations on referendum results. Our Prime Minister, in his inaugural speech on the occasion of his election as the Prime Minister in July of 2022, announced in Parliament for a national awareness and consultation on the Bougainville referendum to take place before this 11th National Parliament is called upon to make a decision on a political settlement for Bougainville, as the decision will impact the rest of our country and the national constitution. Mr. Speaker, my ministry is working on conducting that awareness and consultation program to reach out to the citizens throughout the country to conduct awareness and consultation on the status of Bougainville, and the information provided would include the origin of the Bougainville crisis, deployment of security forces, the BRA and resistant forces, ceasefire, and the Bougainville Peace Agreement implementation processes, including autonomy, weapons disposal, the referendum, post-referendum consultations, and the role of the National Parliament to make a decision on the referendum result. The public consultation is merely for the public awareness, and this ministerial statement can be treated as part of that consultation and awareness effort. Mr. Speaker, Parliamentary Bipartisan Committee on Bougainville. For the purposes of the national awareness and consultation, it is appropriate that the Parliamentary Bipartisan Committee on Bougainville be constituted to lead and conduct the awareness and consultation and make a report to the Parliament for debate. The previous bipartisan parliamentary committee dealt with the issues relating to autonomy, reconciliation, weapons disposal, and referendum readiness. The committee was chaired by the Honorable Governor for Southern Highlands, Honorable William Powie, and the committee's work led to the conduct of the Bougainville referendum, and so I commend their work. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Acting Speaker, it is important and appropriate that members of Parliament from both opposition and government sides are involved in this process through the Parliamentary Bipartisan Committee on Bougainville so that Parliament can make an informed decision. Mr. Acting Speaker, the members of the Bougainville House of Representatives can also be part of this parliamentary committee to assist the work. Tabling of the results of the Bougainville referendum result in the National Parliament. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Section 342 of the National Constitution, the Minister responsible for Bougainville affairs is required constitutionally to table the results of the Bougainville referendum in the National Parliament for a decision to be made. Mr. Acting Speaker, the Arrowcorner Covenant Agreement requires that the Minister for Bougainville Affairs must table the result of the referendum and the report on the consultations in the 11th Parliament this year, 2023. Mr. Speaker, I will therefore be formally tabling the results of the referendum and the report of the post-referendum consultation to the Parliament before the end of 2023, after the procedures for the tabling and the decision of Parliament is put in place. Parliament procedure on tabling and decision on the Bougainville referendum result. Mr. Speaker, although Section 342 of the Constitution, National Constitution, requires the Minister responsible for Bougainville Affairs to table the results of the referendum and the report of the consultations in the Parliament for a decision of the Parliament, it does not, however, prescribe, I repeat, it does not, however, prescribe a procedure through which this can be done and the process to be used by the National Parliament in making its decision. Mr. Speaker, the Arrowcorner Covenant was signed to attempt to agree on and prescribe a procedure for the National Parliament to make a decision on the result of the Bougainville referendum. Officials of both sides, the autonomous Bougainville government and the state, have not been able to agree on the procedure for the Parliament to make a decision on the result of the Bougainville referendum. Mr. Acting Speaker, Mr. Acting Speaker, issues of ratification, decision of the Parliament. Mr. Acting Speaker, officials engaged in dialogue under the Erakone Covenant, attempting to agree to the text of the proposed constitutional regulations, disagree on the meaning of the word ratification and the word decision. The word ratification is used in the Bougainville Peace Agreement, whereas the word any decision is used in Section 342 of the National Constitution, which actually gives effect to Clause 311 of the Bougainville Peace Agreement. Mr. Acting Speaker, in view of these differing views, the following options are available to fill the procedural gap in the Constitution. 1. Parliament may amend the Constitution itself to prescribe the procedure. Or 2. Parliament may amend the standing orders of Parliament to provide for a standalone standing order to deal with the Bougainville referendum result. Or 3. Parliament may approve constitutional regulations under Section 342 of the National Constitution, prescribing the procedure pursuant to the agreement reached in the Erakone Covenant, which I alluded to earlier. Or 4. Parliament may make a sessional order by resolution to deal with the Bougainville referendum result. Or 5, and the last option, Parliament may pass a resolution to refer the matter to the Supreme Court for its opinion and guidance on the interpretation of Section 342 of the Constitution regarding the procedure for decision or ratifying the referendum result. Mr. Speaker, proposal for sessional orders. Mr. Acting Speaker, whilst the options raised above are for the Parliament to choose, after consultation with the Speaker of the House, the Clerk of Parliament, the State Solicitor, and the Autonomous Bougainville Government Leadership and the National Executive Council, it is proposed and recommended that the Parliament adopt a procedure by way of a sessional order. The procedure by sessional order is the most appropriate and expeditious method to deal with the Bougainville referendum result. Mr. Acting Speaker, the sessional order in principle will provide the following procedures for Parliament to ratify or decide on the referendum result. A. The referendum result shall... The sessional order in principle will provide the following procedure for Parliament to ratify or decide on the referendum result. A. The referendum result shall be accepted by a 2/3 absolute majority vote on a motion to be moved by a minister. And B. A motion that, and I quote, a motion that the National Parliament accept the results of the Bougainville referendum shall only be moved by a minister after not less than 3 meetings of the National Parliament from the time of tabling of the results of the referendum. And C, the motion shall be decided by a vote that shall be recorded and must be supported by a 2/3 absolute majority. And D, the Speaker shall announce the result of the vote and the decision made by the Parliament. Mr. Acting Speaker, this process would allow the Parliament to fill the procedural gap and make the decision required by Section 342 of the National Constitution and Clause 311 of the Bougainville Peace Agreement. The text of the proposed sessional orders is appended to this statement of mine for consideration and debate by members of this Parliament. And if the Parliament agrees to such a procedure, it can adopt it in the next Parliament meeting. Mr. Speaker, consequences of Parliament decision on the Bougainville referendum result. Mr. Acting Speaker, a critical point which needs to be noted at this stage is the fact that whatever the decision the Parliament makes on the referendum result, the National Parliament will still need to amend the Constitution to give practical effect to the decision, whether it's in favor of independence or to retain the status quo or otherwise. Mr. Acting Speaker, should the National Parliament pass a resolution accepting the results of the referendum, the National Constitution will still need to be amended to allow a part of the country to become independent. Should the National Parliament refuse to endorse or accept the results of the referendum, the National Constitution will need to be reviewed to maintain the current autonomous government structure or to replace it with another type of autonomous government structure. Conclusion. Mr. Acting Speaker, the Parliament must be mindful that the Bougainville Peace Agreement and the subsequent constitutional amendments contained in Part 14 of the Constitution came about as a result of long negotiated peace agreement to settle a civil conflict. Mr. Acting Speaker, Parliament must be mindful. Parliament must give thought of the fact that independence was stressed as one of the choices for the referendum in the Bougainville Peace Agreement for a reason. Parliament must be mindful that Bougainville people's aspirations for self-determination pre-existed PNG's independence in 1975 as well, and not just born out of the Bougainville conflict, which are all part of our nation's history now. Mr. Acting Speaker, the Bougainville Peace Agreement has achieved peace by peaceful means through the three pillars, which are autonomy, weapons disposal, and referendum, and there has been peace for over 20 years since the peace agreement was signed in 2001. Mr. Acting Speaker, autonomy has been achieved through creation of the autonomous Bougainville government. Weapons disposal has been supervised by the United Nations mission on Bougainville, and the referendum has been conducted as required by the Bougainville Peace Agreement and the National Constitution. It is now for the Parliament to make a decision on the results of the referendum and the outcomes of the consultations as required by Section 342 of the National Constitution. Mr. Acting Speaker, prior to tabling the results of the referendum and the report of the consultations for a decision of the Parliament, the Parliament needs to adopt the procedure that needs to be followed in making the decision required by Section 342 of the National Constitution. Mr. Acting Speaker, the Parliament needs to give due regard to the wishes of the people of Bougainville, reflected in the referendum result, and also be mindful at the same time of the greater national interest by not unduly delaying in making a decision required of it by law. Mr. Acting Speaker, I thank the people of Bougainville and the leadership of the autonomous Bougainville government for their support and respect in allowing the due process of law to take its full course. Mr. Acting Speaker, I also thank our Prime Minister and the Mara Barroso government for his strong commitment and continuous support to Bougainville and the peace process under the Bougainville Peace Agreement, the National Constitution, and the Aracone Covenant. Mr. Acting Speaker, it is now incumbent on me as Minister for Bougainville Affairs, or whoever becomes the Bougainville Affairs, to table the result of the Bougainville referendum and the report of the Bougainville and the report of the post-referendum consultation to the Parliament for its decision in accordance with Section 342 of the National Constitution before the end of this year, 2023, in accordance with Aracone Covenant. Mr. Acting Speaker, finally, I urge everyone to abide by the due process of law as we progress to the final phase of the Bougainville peace process, and to uphold the decision of the National Parliament as the highest decision-making authority on the land, whatever the decision may be. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and commend this statement to the Parliament. Thank you, Acting Speaker.
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Parliament take note of the Minister of Bougainville's statement, and I'd like to make a statement in support.
Make your statement.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a statement in support of the Minister's statement. In doing that, I want to also thank the Minister for the very comprehensive coverage of the issues and to canvass the possible pathways for us to continue to fulfill the expectations as enshrined in the peace agreement and the consequential constitutional amendments. I want to also commend the Minister for taking the time to build relationships with our people of the autonomous region of Bougainville and its leadership, and to understand their views and aspirations. This is clearly reflected in the statement that he has delivered on the floor of this Parliament, and for the first time a very, very comprehensive statement like never before, and in the presence of this Parliament, in the public galleries, the full leadership of the House of Representatives from Bougainville, led by none other than the President, the Honourable Ismail Toroma. Mr. Speaker, I have always said that the issue of Bougainville is the single most important issue for our Parliament. Even though most of us were not there when the agreement was brokered and signed, the 2001 peace agreement, we are locked into these processes. And when I became Prime Minister in 2019, I considered it my job to make sure that all elements of the peace agreement pertaining to the conduct, more especially of the last leg of the peace agreement, and referendum that was outstanding to be undertaken, so that our people in Bougainville can have a say in their political future. It was our responsibility to make sure that that milestone that was prescribed in the Bougainville Peace Agreement was carried out as expected and as intended, so our people know that there is an end game in all of this. Mr. Speaker, in that regard, since being elected as Prime Minister of our nation, I have always accorded Bougainville the highest priority. As the Minister has said, and as the government, we recognize our constitutional and legal obligations to ensure that the result of the referendum of Bougainville's future is put to the Parliament for Parliament's deliberation. The Minister has outlined several issues that are worthy of additional comment. First, the foundation of the Bougainville Peace Agreement, as it is an agreement that is born out of a negotiated outcome from both sides right after the unfortunate crisis of 1988 to that moment, and on both sides, the Bougainville side and the greater Papua New Guinea side, sat on the table of peace and gave birth to the Bougainville Peace Agreement. As a result, we are here following this roadmap in the path. We continue on from the work put in since 2001 to find a final solution to the Bougainville issue or the Bougainville crisis and those matters that requires all our full attention. The autonomous Bougainville government is a creation of the peace process. Every work that has happened or has not happened since then is required of us to assess in the implementation of the Bougainville Peace Agreement. And what is left to be done must be done. That is why, Mr. Speaker, myself and the President signed the sub-agreement 2 years ago. The purpose of that agreement was to accelerate the full transfer of powers from the national government to the autonomous Bougainville government. It is these powers that will help us build strong institutions that will in turn serve Bougainville well today, but more importantly, into the future, whether they become an independent nation or not, subject to the process before us. It is really incumbent that since 2001, we would have, or we could have, or we should have built bigger, better, stronger Bougainville through the evolution of powers that was covered under the Bougainville Peace Agreement. Under Part 14 of our National Constitution, the autonomous Bougainville government, as indicated by the Minister, can assume 59 powers and functions that represent almost all, but minus the power of sovereign state. Yet, unfortunately, in the 21 years since the peace agreement was signed, only 9, rather just 9 powers were fully drawn down. I don't know why, but my department, when I was Education Minister in 2010, on record, that department in 2010 was the first department to transfer power to Bougainville under my watch. As I said in that conference then in between two sides in Holiday Inn, we were engaging on conversations of transfer of power. And I realized that all powers were never transferred as yet. I went back to office. There's a fine gentleman called Mr. Damon Rapese, and secretary, he was Deputy Secretary of Education at that time. And under the late Dr. Pagalio, I gave clear instructions, transfer education powers to Bougainville ASAP. Today, 21 years on, only 9 powers, unfortunately, have drawn down. 4 prime ministers stood before me, or 3 prime ministers stood before me in the entire life. We as a nation have slowed down in fully empowering them. This is clearly the area that needs more attention as we speak today, whilst we are in the sunset of the Bougainville Peace Agreement. We must continue to build institutions. We must demonstrate that current autonomy, if it does not work, then something else must work, whatever it is. Our people need institutions of government to deliver services to them, whether in Papua New Guinea or Bougainville, more so Bougainville, as they have resolved for not autonomy but independence. The institutions of government in Bougainville must be fixed at the very earliest. And Mr. Speaker, as we move towards a vote or final deliberation on the matter in respect to finding a political settlement for the people of Bougainville, we as a national government, or we as a national parliament have an obligation to ensure that the expectations of the Bougainville peace agreement is delivered to the fullest. That is why I continue to called upon our Chief Secretary to personally oversee continued support and transfer of the balance of powers, and to ensure functions that need to be given to Bougainville to make it work better is transferred ASAP. In these powers, it will empower the autonomous Bougainville government not only for service delivery, but more importantly, and something closer to my heart, is power to raise revenue in Bougainville, so that our people in Bougainville are resilient and are stronger and are functioning in a financially autonomous manner also. We have determined that based on economic priorities expressed by ABG, we can also focus on these powers that act as key enablers. Powers, for instance, in mining, fisheries, or ensuring that the other public service powers are functioning well, education, health, law and order, and etc. on the ground level. And I'm happy the Minister has alluded to some of the work that the Marape Pangu government has done since 2019. We've given back, for instance, full share of the BCL Panguna mine set, or BCL set that we held. We've given full back to Bougainville government. What was held for PNG government has been transferred to Bougainville. These are part of our commitment to ensure Bougainville is starting on a path that will enable them financially and economically stronger and sustainable. We've also given them, and the ministers alluded to, land transfer and all assets transfer, and giving them ability to ensure they raise revenue from the fisheries, from the forestry, from the agriculture, and all resources in the territory of Bougainville. As the minister said in his statement, we have an obligation to the fulfillment of the Bougainville peace agreement. And as Prime Minister, I stand here today to determine, to ensure that we deliver on this obligation. But as we do so, and as Minister has rightly pointed out, we must ensure that our people understand the process before us and what will take place. Mr. Speaker, in May 2021, I hosted President Toroma in Kokobo for the first post-referendum consultations. I acknowledge that the result of the referendum is a monumental result that can never be taken away from our nation's history and our shared history today or going forward into the future as we look back retrospectively. I made an important point of reference. As I speak, our friends and our relatives in Bougainville are tuning in and listening. I made an important point of reference. I said, as high as Mount William is, the result will forever remain high and tall. Bougainvilleans have voted for independence. We are faced with this task of dealing with this issue. On both sides, we must be mature about this issue. The framers of the peace agreement were mindful of these issues. They delivered the 2001 peace agreement with the words that we have in the peace agreement. Their spirit, the words, guide us as we move towards the full conclusion of this phase of PNG and Bougainville relationship. I want to give respect to the authors of the 2001 peace agreement. They did respect that the national parliament is supreme. The national parliament, the body that houses or did pass, the Constitutional Assembly that did pass the constitution of this country, in which, under Section 2 of the Constitution, the borders, the sovereignty we have today is defined, I must commend the leadership of Bougainville, especially in 2001 at the time when they signed the 2001 peace agreement. They did include in that agreement that Parliament, National Parliament, shall ratify the result of the vote, whatever the outcome was. Included was referendum. Included was a vote for requirement to vote for independence. But the leaders in 2001 purposefully, deliberately planted that National Parliament will have a deliberation on this result through a ratification process. Mr. Speaker, I want to report to this House my statement in Kokobo that said, as high as Mount William is, will the result indicates the result will remain forever amidst us. Further on, we went to Wabek in August of 2021, and we agreed to the timetable. And both sides agreed to the timetable. It compels us, this Parliament, to deal with this issue. In 2023, some work in 24, some work in 25, more so. In 2023, we must bring the results into the floor of the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, we must be mature that we are here to deal with these issues. And I call for maturity on both sides. In our meeting in Wabek, Mr. President was kind and his team were kind enough. Mr. Speaker, in Wabek, I asked, and I said, I will see through this issue from the lenses of Bougainville. And I asked the Bougainvilleans to see through this issue from the lens of Greater Papua New Guinea, and for us to meet, influenced by the spirit of the 2001 peace agreement, for us to meet within the bounds and respect and shades of the laws of our country. Bougainville leaders were kind to us in Wabek also, as they were kind to me when I went to Bougainville to receive the referendum result with other fellow leaders from our national parliament. And I also at the time asked that we build a constitutional and a parliamentary pathway for this matter to be brought to Parliament. I must thank both sides, our technical officials, our ministers on both sides, our heads of department, our public service on both sides. Today, for the first time, we have a clearer view on what entails the final leg of the 2001 Bougainville Peace Agreement. What is ratification? What is the process before us? Mr. Speaker, I am happy that the Minister is leading well in this space. And I just want to address this House on this issue. For instance, he pointed to a national awareness, an issue that I raised in Wabek. A national awareness on both sides. I know and I appreciate Papua New Guineans for receiving our relatives from Bougainville who have made few visits. But a bipartisan approach on both sides of the House, including our members of the House of Representatives of Bougainville, must join us for a national consultation. The national consultation is not for a vote or to question the referendum. The referendum is unique, held already, decision made already, conducted, guided by the 2001 peace agreement. This national consultation is not a referendum consultation. It is an awareness to inform the country that Bougainvilleans have voted for independence. National Parliament will be handling this matter on the floor of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, because, and I speak with the utmost of all warmth in my heart for my friends and relatives in Bougainville, the border that we have today prescribed under Section 2 of our Constitution is a border that was born, carved out by the fathers of a nation. including Sir Paul Lapun, the founder and the first leader of Pangu Party, the party that stands for Papua and New Guinea United and in union. It is a great pain in my generation of leaders to split this country. The country does not belong to the member for Tari, it belongs to everyone. When I received the referendum results in Arawa, our people were gracious and they embraced every word that I said, including my word that whilst I come to you as your Prime Minister, I am taking the result as member for Tari in the bag that belongs to the Tari people. What I meant was simply this. On the floor of Parliament, I am reduced to just one member, one vote. Whilst I may be Prime Minister representing the combined aspirations of a people, when I'm reduced to myself, I come from one part of our country. The border that defines our country was born as a result of consensus and worked together by people from east, west, north, south, all parts of the entire length and breadth of our country. Not one Prime Minister, not one Prime Minister, or not one person has right to tamper with this border. And so it is a consensual process that lies before us, and I want to appreciate sincerely the leadership in Bougainville for looking in and seeing from our context that we are grappled with the challenge that is constitutionally a mandate of every citizen of this country to defend their territory and sovereignty. The Bougainville leaders would recall, without naming that leader, but one senior Papuan leader from the highlands of our country in Arawa in 20. In Buka, rather, in 2020 or 21, he was there and he was reduced to tears. And he said, "You are my sister, you are my brother. It is painful for me to talk about you going." And so we are grappled with this issue that is facing us, but I want to also at the same time inform our friends in Bougainville, your vote is registered. Your call for political self-determination is registered. And we are working through these processes. Whatever the outcome is, the consultation with the rest of our country that must and should take place this year, and you with us from Bougainville and us on both sides, is to inform to our people, one Melanesian people, one Papua New Guinean people, that Bougainville have spoken on independence. And our people's view must be sought because it was in that same process in the 71, 72, 73, 74 that the consultation took place for the union we have today, in the midst of Bougainvilleans calling to be on their own, our friends in East New Britain, the Motugan Association calling to be on their own, the Papua Besana movement was growing and calling to be on their own, the Highlanders were saying that we will not be independent but defer independence. The union that we so called today, one Papua New Guinea, one nation, one country, was a union that was formed before my Prime Ministership, before this Parliament came into existence. The 11th Parliament, rather. At 1974-75, I was a small boy eating saksak and banana in the mountains, not mountains, rather plains of Nomad River in Western Province. Little did I knew I would be presiding over a moment in time, the togetherness of our country will be brought into question. And I call at this point in time, as the Minister has now for the first time put forth the path towards the last leg, define what is ratification, for us to engage in national consultation informing the rest of our country that our brothers and sisters in Bougainville have voted for independence, and let's see this with total maturity. I pray that all of us, and Papua New Guineans, the rest of Papua New Guinea for the first time, will see from the eyes of Bougainville what they want and their aspirations, and from Bougainvilleans from south to north, right around Small Buka and right around the main Bougainville and the outals of Modlok, Carteret Nation, to see from the lenses of the rest of Papua New Guinea what Papua New Guinea wishes for us collectively. And therein, and I want to conclude, without diminishing the aspirations of the Bougainville people, as evident in the 97.7% result of the referendum, therein for us, as we go into this engagement of consultation, find a political solution. Members of this House, Mr. Speaker, this is no more about administrative and economic solution. This has been matters that we would have worked in 2001 up till today, and we are working through. If we are trying to catch up on some that we have not worked hard on. But this is more so about finding political solution. Finding political solution. I want to conclude by asking the Minister's statement for the first time outlays to us the path to the last process as espoused by the Bougainville Peace Agreement of 2001. It talks about National Parliament ratifying. I want to conclude to our friends in Bougainville and to all of us here. The spirit and the words of those who authored the 2001 peace agreement must be revisited. If there was no relevance to National Parliament playing a major role in the last leg of the peace agreement, there would not have been a requirement of National Parliament to ratify. They placed the insertion and inserted into the peace agreement a role of the National Parliament as the house of the entire people, including Bougainville, to have a final say in the last leg. And when we come to the last leg, in as far as the 2001 peace agreement is concerned, I conclude. I am still seeing from the lenses of Bougainville. I want Bougainville to see from the lenses of Papua New Guinea. And collectively, we find a political solution that doesn't offend your rights, but as well as doesn't offend the rights of the greater Papua New Guinea. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on this, I move that Parliament take note of this statement and further debates be made order of the day for a subsequent sitting. No. Move the sword.
Honourable members, the question is that motion be agreed to. Those who are in favour stand up. Say aye. Aye. Against? All in favour. Leader of Honourable members, I suspend the Parliament to 2 p.m. for lunch, and resume at 2 p.m. this afternoon.